You think your nighttime anxiety is the problem? You think that if you could just quiet your mind or turn off your thoughts, you'd finally sleep peacefully. But what if I told you that this interpretation is superficial? What if the anxiety that appears when you turn out the light isn't actually the enemy? What if it's just the siren of a much older, much deeper alarm that's been trying to get your attention for years? The truth is, during the day, you're too busy to listen. Routine, work, distractions, the rush. All of this drowns out the voice trying to alert you to something amiss. But at night, when the world falls silent, that voice finds no obstacles. That's when it screams. What you feel as a racing mind may actually be the result of internal debts you've accumulated. Not just financial debts. Debts from conversations you didn't have, decisions you didn't make, promises you didn't keep. Anxiety, in this sense, is like a persistent debt collector. It knocks on your mental door to remind you that there's something you should have resolved. And this is where the provocation comes in. Maybe the problem isn't anxiety itself. Maybe the problem is your refusal to listen to what it's telling you. It's more comfortable to treat anxiety as a chemical anomaly or a psychological accident than to see it as a messenger demanding action. Because if it's a messenger, that means the responsibility for change lies with you, not with the medication, the therapist, or external circumstances. Jordan Peterson often says that life is inevitably a struggle between order and chaos. When you ignore tasks that need to be done, when you avoid responsibilities, you allow chaos to gain ground. It doesn't invade all at once. It creeps in silently, until at the end of the day, it sits beside your bed. And that's where the game changes. Anxiety stops being just a bad feeling and reveals itself as a map. The discomfort you feel isn't random. It's pointing to specific areas of your life that need order. It could be your neglected health, your neglected finances, your unstable relationships, or your lost sense of purpose. But there's a problem. Because anxiety is uncomfortable, the natural reaction is to try to suffocate it. You seek distractions, watch videos late at night, scroll through social media, hoping to fall asleep before your thoughts return. But this is a trap. The more you try to escape, the louder the messenger hits. The hook here is simple, but brutal. What if, instead of fighting nighttime anxiety, you started investigating it? What if, instead of treating it as an enemy to be defeated, you treated it as a guide to be followed? This takes courage, because it means entering the territory of conscious chaos. It means that the next time you're lying there staring at the ceiling, you'll ask, "What are you trying to tell me?" This shift in attitude doesn't bring instant relief, and that's precisely why it works. By accepting the call of chaos, you begin to reclaim lost ground, and every small adjustment you make throughout the day, accomplishing a task you've been putting off, having a difficult conversation, making a commitment to yourself, is like building a wall against the night's invasion. The final provocation is this: if you continue to believe that anxiety is just a flaw, you'll keep trying to turn it off. But if you start to see it as a signal, you'll realize that it's leading you to the very heart of the problem. And at that heart, there's something that needs to be addressed. Not tomorrow, not next week, but now. There's a common mistake when discussing anxiety and insomnia, treating them as if they were mere passing annoyances, as if simply thinking positive or relaxing would make them disappear. This is disrespectful to those who experience long, suffocating nights, staring at the ceiling while their bodies beg for rest, and their minds refuse any respite. The first truth to be told is that this experience is not trivial. It is a silent battlefield. Imagine yourself in a war where there is no gunfire, but the enemy is constant and invisible. There is no time to let your guard down. When everyone else is asleep, you remain vigilant, caught between physical exhaustion and mental hyperactivity. This erodes your self-confidence and undermines your ability to believe that a better day will come. Jordan Peterson describes this feeling as being immersed in chaos, and chaos at its core is more than disorder. It is the absence of a visible path, the territory where any step can lead to further uncertainty. Validating this pain means acknowledging its severity, not diminishing it with empty phrases. It's admitting that living like this isn't a lack of willpower, but a test of emotional and psychological endurance. When Peterson talks about chaos, he doesn't describe it as something abstract or distant. He speaks as if acknowledging that, for some people, chaos isn't external, It's a constant presence within the mind. This validation isn't an invitation to self-pity. It's an act of respect, because the one who confronts their own mind every night isn't a frail patient. They're a warrior fighting a battle few can see. The world wakes in the morning and goes about its day unaware that while they slept, you were there, in the dark, trying to contain thoughts that came like endless waves. There's one detail that changes your entire perspective. Prolonged suffering isn't proof of weakness. It's proof that you haven't given up. Those who completely lose the battle against anxiety often seek ways to completely numb their minds, whether through heavy distractions or a complete escape from reality. You're still here, seeking understanding, seeking solutions, and that means there's strength amidst this chaos. Peterson often uses imagery from mythological battles to explain this moment. He would say that you're at the point in the journey where the hero, surrounded by darkness, hasn't yet found the sword he needs to win. This isn't the end of the story, but one of the most important chapters. This is where courage is tested, not when everything is clear and calm. Validating your pain also means giving it a legitimate place in the narrative of your life, treating it not as a mistake to be erased, but as an event that marks a before and after. It is in this recognition that transformation begins, because by respecting the magnitude of the struggle, you begin to respect yourself as well. And here's something crucial. When pain is ignored or minimized, it intensifies. When it's acknowledged, it begins to reorganize itself. This doesn't mean it disappears immediately, but it does mean you begin to gain power over it. The enemy you name loses some of its power. The chaos you describe begins to reveal its patterns. The point here is simple, but vital. Don't let anyone treat your anxious insomnia as something small. Don't let anyone treat you as weak for struggling with it. What you face is worthy of respect. And more than that, it deserves a response that matches it. This respect for one's own pain is the foundation upon which the next stage will be built. Finding a leader, a guide, someone who has traversed this same territory and can show us a way out. And that's precisely what leads us to the next chapter of this journey. Amidst this unstable territory, where darkness seems to stretch without horizon, it's natural to seek a figure who knows the way. Not someone who promises illusory shortcuts or instant solutions, but a guide who has already traversed the same hostile terrain and mapped its routes. This is where Jordan Peterson comes in. Peterson isn't a speaker of easy phrases. His message isn't tailored to provide immediate comfort, but to offer direction. He doesn't say calm down or think positive. Instead, he surveys the landscape like a military strategist assessing the battlefield. He recognizes that the anxious mind at night is a reflection of life during the day, and that the real battle isn't won just by trying to sleep, but by the decisions accumulated over weeks, months, and years. His authority doesn't come solely from academic titles or years of teaching. It stems from having delved deeply into human history, from the most ancient myths to contemporary narratives, and from having perceived a pattern. Where there is chaos, there is also the possibility of order. But this order isn't handed down, it's earned. Peterson treats anxiety as a legitimate adversary. He places it on the same level as mythical figures representing a dragon or a monster guarding a treasure. For him, nighttime anxiety is not just a chemical reaction, but a symbol, a sign that something in your life is demanding confrontation. And this interpretation changes everything, because if the symptom is a symbol, the solution is a mission. He proposes adopting an active stance, like that of a commander given a map of critical attack points. This map, in this case, is the very experience of anxious insomnia. Every recurring thought, every memory that emerges in the silence, every fear that recurs. For Peterson, these elements don't appear by chance. They are clues, and ignoring them is like tearing up the map before reaching your destination. By positioning himself as a guide, he offers not just advice, but a framework for reorganizing life. This framework involves small daily victories, getting up at the same time, establishing clear tasks, keeping non-negotiable commitments, and facing conversations or decisions that have been avoided. He knows that the body and mind only accept rest when they feel their territory is protected. The difference between Peterson and most voices on anxiety is that he doesn't sugarcoat the reality. He says it will be difficult, that there will be internal resistance, that the temptation to retreat will be constant. But he also asserts that it is possible to go through this struggle and emerge stronger, more disciplined, and more aware of one's own worth. This honesty is part of the reason so many follow him, because there is no sugarcoating, only clarity. This clarity, however, isn't just intellectual, it's practical. It transforms philosophical concepts into concrete actions, capable of changing not only the quality of sleep but the meaning of life. And when someone speaks from this union of deep knowledge and practical experience, confidence isn't an option, it comes naturally. This is where, as a viewer, you need to understand something important. Listening isn't enough. You have to commit. A guide can show you the way, but they can't walk it for you. If this content resonates with you, please subscribe and like it. That way we can continue this fight together. Having an experienced leader doesn't eliminate the effort required, but it greatly increases the chances that that effort will be directed correctly. And when you're lost in the chaos, having a reliable map and someone to interpret it is the difference between wandering indefinitely or finally finding your way out. When Peterson talks about how to deal with nighttime anxiety, he doesn't offer palliatives. Instead of presenting tricks for falling asleep faster, he builds a set of tools that require discipline and consistency. These tools aren't meant to create immediate comfort, but to reconfigure the internal terrain in which anxiety takes root. The first is the notion of daily order. Peterson argues that the mind doesn't rest if it doesn't believe its territory is secure. This territory is your life as a whole. If you live in a constant state of improvisation, waking up and going to sleep at random times, putting off important tasks, avoiding responsibilities, the mind interprets this as vulnerability. And when night falls, it activates its alert mechanisms, keeping you vigilant. Creating order means, first and foremost, establishing clear routines, waking up and going to bed at the same time, creating a predictable sequence of actions before bed, and avoiding putting off important decisions until the end of the day. This isn't just organization, it's a signal to the brain that chaos is being contained. Another tool is clarity of purpose. Peterson insists that having a routine isn't enough. Each daily action must be connected to a larger goal. This transforms mundane tasks into parts of a system that supports your life's purpose. When you know why you're doing what you do, your mind finds fewer reasons to constantly churn. He also talks about facing small battles before they become wars. This means dealing with pending issues, even if they seem uncomfortable. It could be responding to a message that's been avoided, organizing a messy physical space, or resolving an emotional debt with someone. Each unresolved issue is like a crack in the walls, and at night, when there are no distractions, it's through these cracks that chaos invades. Peterson uses war metaphors to make it clear that each of these steps is an act of fortification. Creating a nightly ritual, for example, isn't just about getting ready for bed. It's about erecting mental barriers that signal to the body and mind that the day's battle is over. This might include activities like reading something light, writing down any thoughts that are still active, practicing controlled breathing, or briefly reviewing what was accomplished in the last few hours. Consistency is another key characteristic of these tools. It's not about following the routine only when it's convenient, but maintaining it even on days when the urge to give up is strong. The mind needs consistency to trust that the order is real, not a temporary attempt at control. Peterson emphasizes that these tools are not shortcuts to feeling good, but instruments for building a solid internal structure. They require conscious effort, discipline, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. And that's precisely why they work, because they treat the cause, not just the symptom. By applying these practices, the goal isn't simply to sleep better, but to transform the way you live. Rest becomes a natural consequence of an organized, purpose-driven life. It's not magic, but an inevitable effect of bringing order to chaos. These tools act as armor. They don't completely eliminate chaos, because that's impossible, but they drastically reduce its ability to dominate your mind at its most vulnerable moments. Over time, nighttime, anxiety stops being a recurring enemy and becomes an occasional visitor with no real power over you. When the day is lived with clarity, structure, and purpose, the night ceases to be hostile territory. Silence is no longer a space where fears scream, but an environment where rest naturally settles in. And it is at this point that the battle begins to tilt in your favor. There comes a moment when the game changes, a moment when you realize that the fight against nighttime anxiety isn't solved by accumulating relaxation techniques, but by adopting a radically different approach to life itself. This is the turning point, the transition from seeking relief to seeking responsibility. Until now, anxiety has been seen as a symptom to be managed. You've tried to reduce its impact, silence its signals, find ways to numb it even when it's present. But this approach keeps the problem alive, only masked. It's like putting plugs on holes without ever rebuilding the structure that's crumbling. Underneath, change happens when you understand that anxiety isn't a random accident. It's a reflection of the parts of your life that remain unowned, uncontrolled. Jordan Peterson argues that responsibility is the antidote to chaos, and chaos is precisely what fuels anxiety. Without accountability, chaos expands. With it, it begins to recede. The turning point, then, requires a conscious choice, abandoning the spectator stance and becoming a protagonist. This means stopping waiting for external factors to do the work and deciding that every area of your life will be touched by your intention and effort. It's not a comfortable decision. It's easier to remain in the position of someone who tries to deal with the problem than to face it head-on. But it's precisely this uncomfortable shift that paves the way for real results. Responsibility, in Peterson's sense, isn't just about fulfilling obvious obligations like paying bills or arriving on time. It's also about facing the internal issues you avoid, resolving conflicts you've been putting off, and accepting that some of the suffering you experience is the result of your own choices or omissions. It's about accepting that no one will come and save you from what only you can solve. This turning point redefines our relationship with nighttime anxiety. It stops being an unpredictable invader and becomes a signal. Where there's discomfort, there's a pending issue to be resolved. Recurrent thoughts about work can indicate unfinished tasks or conversations. A painful memory can reveal something unforgiven or unresolved. A persistent fear can point to areas where you haven't adequately prepared for the future. The most challenging part of this transition is that it doesn't offer immediate rewards. Taking responsibility requires consistent effort, and the rewards may take time to appear. It's a long-term investment. But this delay is also what makes the results solid. Each step taken builds a foundation that supports not only better nights but stronger days. Peterson would say this moment is the equivalent of the scene where the hero, aware of the magnitude of the challenge, takes up his sword and enters the dragon's territory. The dragon remains there, threatening, but now the hero goes to meet it instead of passively waiting for its attack. This reversal of posture changes the course of the story. The turning point doesn't completely eliminate anxiety. It's an inevitable part of life, but it does transform its meaning for you. Before, it was a suffocating weight. Now it's a call to action. Before, it was a barrier. Now it's a gateway to growth. From that moment on, each sleepless night stops being a failure and becomes a reminder that there's more work to do, more areas to organize, more responsibilities to take on. And this awareness in itself is liberating, because it puts control back in your hands. When this shift occurs, anxiety loses its power to paralyze. It becomes fuel for movement. And it is in this movement that true transformation begins. The anxious mind works in a specific way. It seeks order and predictability, but at the same time, it's attracted to signs of danger or novelty. This means that to deal with nighttime anxiety, it's not enough to create an organized environment. It's necessary to structure mental triggers that direct thoughts toward constructive paths before they get lost in the chaos. Jordan Peterson understands that anxiety is fueled by a natural anticipatory mechanism. The brain is constantly evaluating what could go wrong, trying to prepare for threats. If this process isn't guided, it becomes a whirlwind of catastrophic scenarios. The strategy, then, is to provide the brain with a clear roadmap, a kind of map with defined points, so that the energy of anticipation is channeled into building solutions rather than creating new fears. One of the most powerful triggers is clear rules. When you set limits and standards for yourself, your mind relies on this framework and reduces the need to create alternative scenarios. This can include fixed times to turn off devices, consistent sleep hygiene routines, and to-do lists for the next day. Each of these elements sends a clear message. There's control, there's order, and there's no need to keep every alarm going. Another essential trigger is positive anticipation. Just as the anxious mind anticipates problems, it can be trained to anticipate desired outcomes. Before bed, instead of allowing yourself to dwell on everything that could go wrong, you direct your attention to a specific goal for the next day, something concrete that's worth looking forward to. This simple adjustment changes the emotional chemistry of the mind during the night, reducing feelings of threat. Peterson also discusses the importance of predictability and routine as a form of psychological safety. Small, repeated actions daily create familiarity, and familiarity reduces uncertainty. That's why he compares a good routine to a war map. Every step is thought out so that when the enemy appears, you already know exactly how to react. Internal language is another crucial factor. Verbal triggers, such as mantras or key phrases, act as mental anchors. In times of turmoil, telling yourself phrases like, "Order is progressing," or "The territory is protected," helps redirect your thoughts toward a sense of security. This isn't an illusion. It reinforces a real process you're building over the days. Furthermore, there's the reciprocity trigger, which Peterson would apply strategically. When receiving something of value, the mind tends to want to reciprocate. This means that by engaging with content and practices that strengthen your discipline and mental clarity, you create a cycle where the simple act of applying these teachings generates motivation to continue. If this strategy is already helping you think differently, subscribe and leave your like to strengthen this. Community. A final key trigger is review and closure. Before bed, taking a few minutes to mentally review what has been accomplished and what will be done the next day creates a sense of completion. This closure reduces the mind's tendency to continue processing pending tasks throughout the night, because it has already received the message that planning is under control. These mental triggers don't work in isolation. They complement each other, forming a system that meets the basic need of an anxious mind, knowing there's a plan and that it's in motion. Over time, the repetition of these practices creates conditioning. Nighttime anxiety, which once seemed inevitable, begins to give way to a state of healthy alertness during the day and deep rest at night. Ultimately, the strategy is simple. Replace automatic fear triggers with conscious, commanding ones. It's not about eliminating anxiety, but about teaching it to work in your favor. An anxious mind needs anchors. Amid the whirlwind of thoughts that arise at night, a set of short, repetitive phrases can act as ropes that prevent freefall. Jordan Peterson understands this mechanism and uses it deliberately, transforming core ideas into mantras, not as empty slogans, but as living reminders that shape behavior. Repetition isn't a superficial tactic. It builds familiarity and reinforces mental circuits until the message stops being something you hear and becomes something you incorporate. In a mind accustomed to getting lost in the chaos, this familiarity acts as a fixed point in the midst of the storm. Phrases like "order before rest" or "chaos retreats before responsibility" aren't just catchphrases. They condense entire principles into a few syllables, making them easy to remember in moments of stress. When nighttime anxiety starts to creep in, repeating these phrases is like reminding your brain that there's a safe path to follow. Peterson also suggests repeating these phrases not only during critical moments, but throughout the day, in neutral or positive situations. This creates conditioning. The phrase is no longer associated solely with moments of crisis, but becomes part of your ongoing narrative. Thus, when night falls, the mantra is already deeply integrated and its power to act is greater. Another essential element is the tone with which these phrases are repeated. It's not about saying the words mechanically, but with the conviction of someone reaffirming a decision already made. Repetition gains power when it's charged with intention, when it's uttered as a commitment to change. These phrases serve as reminders that anxiety isn't the absolute enemy, but a sign that something needs attention. They don't deny the presence of chaos. On the contrary, they acknowledge its existence but remind you that you have tools to deal with it. The impact of this practice is intensified when the sentences are written down. Putting them in a notebook or leaving them visible in the bedroom or even at work reinforces their exposure. Repeated reading and frequent eye contact increase the likelihood that in times of crisis, the mind will access this information before diving into disordered thoughts. Peterson sees this as the creation of a tribe language, an internal code that distinguishes those committed to the transformation journey. By adopting these phrases as part of your personal vocabulary, you begin to identify with a community of people who have chosen to face chaos head-on. The strategic use of repetition doesn't replace concrete actions, but rather supports them. It's easier to maintain a disciplined routine, complete pending tasks, and follow a plan when your mind is constantly reminded of the why behind these actions. The mantra serves as a quick reminder of the philosophy you've chosen to adopt. Over time, these phrases stop being something you say and become something you live. They shape decisions, influence reactions, and alter how you interpret challenges. When anxiety tries to dominate the night, it will be met not by a defenseless mental terrain, but by a fortress built with words that carry meaning and purpose. This internalization process requires persistence. In the early days, the repetition may seem artificial, but as you maintain the habit, you'll notice that the phrases emerge spontaneously, even without conscious effort. It's at this point that they stop being a drill and become part of your identity. Ultimately, key phrases aren't just sounds or written text. They're compact declarations of who you've decided to be, and each time you repeat them, you reaffirm that commitment, strengthening the link between thought, emotion, and action. Visualizing the future is more than an exercise in imagination. It's a strategic tool for creating direction and purpose. Jordan Peterson insists that people need a clear vision of what they want to become, because without this defined destination, the mind is vulnerable to chaos. In the context of nighttime anxiety, this vision isn't limited to imagining peaceful nights, but to building a complete portrait of who you will be when you bring order to your life. This desirable future isn't a fantasy where everything is easy. On the contrary, it's a realistic scenario, achieved through effort and sustained by discipline. Imagine going to bed not feeling like you're escaping your thoughts, but with the certainty that the day was lived to the fullest. Tasks were accomplished, responsibilities assumed, necessary conversations had. There are no hidden debts and therefore no mental persecution. In this future, the silence of the night is no longer an enemy. It becomes an ally. The bedroom ceases to be a battlefield where thoughts clash and becomes a sanctuary where rest is natural. You lie down knowing you don't need to fight your mind, because it recognizes its safe territory. Vision also includes a heightened sense of competence. Each challenge faced throughout the day reinforces your confidence that you can handle life's demands. This competence isn't born from occasional great feats, but from small daily victories. Getting up on time, sticking to your routine, resolving pending issues, and keeping commitments are the building blocks of this confidence. Peterson emphasizes that a desirable future must be inspiring enough to motivate action, but also challenging enough to sustain growth. This means that when designing this future self, you're not just seeking peace, but also purpose. Peace at night is a consequence of a meaningful life. In practice, this vision requires clarity of values. What principles do you want to guide your decisions? What kind of person do you want to be recognized for? By answering these questions, you begin to shape a pattern of behavior that influences every daily choice. And it is these choices, repeated over time, that make the vision a reality. Another point Peterson emphasizes is the importance of connecting the desired future to the present in a concrete way. Imagining isn't enough. You need to create a bridge between who you are now and who you want to become. This bridge is made of specific goals and clear deadlines, not indefinite waiting. Every day you act in alignment with this vision is a solid step toward your desired destination. The impact of this projection extends beyond sleep. Once you begin living according to this future image, anxiety diminishes during the day as well. You become more centered, less reactive, and more focused on what truly matters. And when night falls, the mind finds fewer reasons to remain alert. A desirable future, therefore, is not just a pretty image to motivate. It's a commitment, a pact you make with yourself to become someone who faces chaos with courage and builds order with consistency. This commitment, maintained day after day, is what turns vision into reality. When this transformation takes place, rest ceases to be a rare treat and becomes a natural part of your routine. And it's at that moment that you realize you've achieved not just better nights, but a more stable, meaningful, and worthy life. Getting here requires more than listening and agreeing. It requires action. The transformation you seek doesn't happen through the passive absorption of ideas, but through their deliberate application. This is where the call to action becomes crucial. And I'm not talking about a simple invitation to interact. I'm talking about a public commitment that seals the decision to change. Jordan Peterson understands that public commitments create accountability. When you declare, even in a virtual space, that you're taking on a certain goal, the weight of that declaration changes how you see yourself and how you act. That's why the call to action isn't just about strengthening a channel or a community, but about solidifying your own pact with order and discipline. Signing a pledge here means, first, choosing to be part of a network of people facing chaos head-on. It means making it clear that you're not just consuming content, but positioning yourself as someone who will apply what you've learned in your daily life. It's a symbolic act, but with practical consequences. When you commit, even in front of others, you're more likely to stay focused because you now have a sense of accountability. Sharing this content is also part of this call to action, not as a gesture of self-promotion, but as an act of collective responsibility. By sending the message to someone else who may be fighting the same battle, you expand the reach of this coping philosophy. You become not just a receiver, but a transmitter of a method that can save nights and restore strength. Writing down your intention is another way to solidify your commitment. By putting into words what your first action will be starting today, you create clarity and reinforce your plan mentally. Writing down what you intend to do, whether it's establishing a fixed bedtime, starting a nighttime ritual, or tackling an emotional issue, gives concrete form to your intention. And clear intentions tend to translate into consistent behavior. This call to action, therefore, is threefold: subscribe, share, and comment. But each of these gestures carries more weight than it appears. They represent the transition from spectator to participant. They are signs that you've not only absorbed the message, but are willing to be an active part of your own transformation and the transformation of others. Commit now, sign up, share, and comment on how you'll apply this today. This isn't a superficial request, but a symbolic act that marks the beginning of a new stance in the face of chaos. It's the equivalent, in Peterson's metaphor, of entering the battlefield and taking a stand alongside other warriors. The sooner you act, the sooner you'll start noticing changes. And don't expect instant perfection. Progress will come in the form of small victories. A day when you managed to fall asleep faster, a morning when you woke up with more energy, a week when you maintained the same bedtime. These victories, accumulated, build a new reality. The call to action is the moment where theory and practice meet. This is where you decide whether this content will be just another video or the turning point that starts a new chapter in your life. In the end, it's not about clicking the subscribe button or writing a comment. It's about what these gestures represent. The conscious choice to stop living as a hostage to anxiety and start acting like someone who reclaims territory night after night. The entire construction thus far has not been simply about providing information or reflection, but about creating a shift in identity. The true strategy of persuasion isn't about convincing someone that an idea is right. It's about getting them to see themselves differently, and based on that new vision, act consistently. Jordan Peterson knows that when a person begins to identify as someone who takes responsibility and confronts chaos, that identity shapes all their choices. The narrative we've covered so far functions as a manifesto. It begins with an initial provocation, validates the pain, presents a trusted authority, provides practical tools, points to a turning point, and establishes mental triggers. But the real persuasion comes at the end, when the viewer understands that all of this isn't just a set of techniques for better sleep, but an invitation to live better. The goal is for nighttime anxiety to eventually stop being perceived as an obstacle and start being interpreted as a messenger. This shift in meaning is powerful because it transforms how you react to the problem. Instead of running away from it, you use it as a starting point to strengthen neglected areas of your life. Persuasion here also relies on a sense of belonging. When you adopt the principles discussed, you become part of a group of people who share a common philosophy that the difficult path, the path of responsibility, is the only one that leads to lasting meaning. This sense of being part of something bigger sustains commitment and makes change more resilient. Another key element is the clarity of the exchange. Nothing is promised without effort. From the outset, the message makes it clear that the path requires discipline and courage. This dispels illusions and creates an honest contract between the proposal and the recipient. The person who continues is the one willing to face the challenge, and this willingness increases the likelihood of achieving real results. The persuasion strategy also incorporates repetition and reinforcement of key ideas. Throughout the process, concepts such as order, responsibility, confrontation, and purpose are revisited in different ways, creating multiple anchor points. This repetition isn't redundant, it's what keeps the message fresh in the mind, days after hearing it, influencing decisions. In closing, the call is not just to apply techniques, but to adopt a new pattern of life. Commit now. Sign up, share, and comment on how you'll put what you've learned into practice. This gesture is not an end in itself, but a symbolic milestone that signals the beginning of a new phase. Ultimately, persuasion is cemented by understanding what's at stake. It's not just about avoiding sleepless nights, but about avoiding a life lived below your potential. The choice to confront chaos and build order impacts every area: relationships, work, health, and even how you approach future challenges. The general persuasion strategy, therefore, is this: show that the problem is real and deep-seated, prove that there is a legitimate way to deal with it, and invite the viewer to become the kind of person who follows that path. Once this new identity is accepted, the right actions become almost inevitable. And at that point, nighttime anxiety ceases to be a constant burden and becomes another chapter overcome in the story of someone who has decided to take control of their own destiny.